Welcome to the AdTechGod Pod, where we speak with the AdTech startup founders. Today's guest is Michael Berkowitz. He has a long history of working in the AdTech space, having worked at Spiny, BERT, Lotomy, MediaMath, and more. So most podcast guests are recommended by one person, but Michael was recommended by multiple people, including Corey Greenberg, Heather Carver, Tal Amani. So it's always good to get recommendations. So if anyone's out there and wants to recommend a guest, please do. I value that way more than any other source for guests. Michael, I'm really excited to meet you and get to know you. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Michael, your background's pretty incredible. You've worked at some great companies. We obviously know way too many common people. But can you give me just a brief couple-minute background of what you've done in the space and what you plan on doing in the future?
Yeah, I think I got my start a little bit more of a circuitous way than most people did. And that may just be a question of timing, being a guy that's been around the industry for as long as I have, coming up on at least a second decade, maybe even pressing a third. I know there's a few of us still hanging around, guys I run into whose hair and beards have turned as gray as mine. But so I actually started off on the media side. I worked for ABC News for about 7 years. And as a reporter and a journalist, I was on the receiving end of a lot of public relations outreach and made a decision at one point or another that instead of being the guy targeted with the PR, I should try my hand at PR. And I joined some of the really big PR agencies at the time, all of which were starting up their technology practices. And the one that I was at Edelman PR Worldwide, the biggest independent PR firm in the world. And the first client that I was ever assigned was actually the IAB. The IAB had just been started. There was a couple of guys that had organized this thing. I think that they had a really good vision of the future and that there was going to be a need for this interactive advertising bureau. And so that was really my first taste of technology. And it was one of those experiences where literally like the hook went immediately into my mouth and I knew what it was that I was meant to do. And then, as I think my career evolved, as it is true for many people, opportunities present themselves if you're smart enough to recognize them when they show up. We had a company that we're working for alongside the IAB that was called MaxLogic, that was bought by a company called Excite. These companies are all obviously gone, folded into larger companies. And that company was, one of the first acquisitions I had ever gone through, one of the first real M&A opportunities, and it made the founder incredibly rich. And so I decided that instead of being on the agency side, I should jump to the corporate side. And, that's how things got started for me. I then landed working for the old DoubleClick CEO, Kevin Ryan, and the old DoubleClick CTO, Dwight Merriman. They had started a company in the city called AliCorp. It was an incubator. There were 6 companies in the AliCorp family, one of which was Gilt. If you remember Gilt, the fashion site?
Yeah, I do remember Gilt.
And one of it was Henry Blodgett's The Business Insider, as it was known back then. And, again, as fate and serendipity would have it, another company, and it was a CDN that was called Panther Express. The head of Panther Express was Tony Katzer. And Tony Katzer will be the guy to who I forever owe my career in ad tech to. I tell him every time I see him, every time his name comes up. Tony Katzer was the one who punched my ticket. Without him, I don't know where I would be, but certainly not anywhere near where I am today. So Tony got recruited out of Panther Express to go work at MediaMath. He made good on his promise. He said he would come and fetch me, and he did. He pulled me into MediaMath, and thus began my journey really on the corporate side of ad tech, working for Joe Zawadzki, visionary guys like him. And then I just, one day as I was working for Joe, one of his investors invited me out to dinner with this Swedish startup that I'd never heard of before. It's a company you mentioned in the introduction called BERT. BERT was, an analytics company. Analytics was new to ad tech. I met these guys. They started asking me a bunch of questions. And the next thing I knew, my own little cottage industry had been born. And so for the last 10 or 15 years, what I've been doing is finding all of these really smart, really clever overseas ad tech companies that are trying to break into the big US market. And so I identify them, I figure out what's new and novel about them. I figure out, how their messages would resonate with the US publishing community. And then I start making introductions to this network that, this robust network that I've built over the years. And, and try to level the playing field, for these companies that the only disadvantage they have is that they're not American. Then of course the pandemic came and the world got much smaller and the need for that sort of thing decreased. And, as a guy at my age and in my position, I think that's a fantastic thing. All of these overseas ad tech companies are doing really, really, really smart things. There used to be a big gap between, U.S. ad tech and ad tech coming particularly from Western Europe. That gap has now closed. I could even make arguments that much of the ad tech coming out of Western and Northern Europe is better than the ad tech you find in the United States. And so, I continue to try to identify these companies that are coming out of other parts of the world and import them into the U.S. market and connect them with the publishers who in this day and age are obviously struggling a little bit and need all the good tech that they can get.
What do you feel is the hardest part when, whether you're reaching out or whether they're reaching out to you to work with you directly? What do you think is the determining factor of you deciding on working with them? And I know when there aren't 10 people reaching out, sometimes you just decide by saying yes. But what's like really the one thing that you look for and go, wow, I actually believe in this product. I think that there's a good market fit.
Yeah. So, it is in my case, the answer to that question will always be something that we haven't seen before, a new and novel product. And that becomes increasingly difficult with every year. So, Spiny, for example, I had never seen, or for that matter, heard of a content analytics suite. I know that Parsley had one. I'm not suggesting that it was, rudimentary, but it was just a less sophisticated model. Spiny's model came along. It was an absolutely spectacular piece of technology. But I think I have to sort of reverse engineer my answer to that question, ATG, and say, it's not so much what I think, it's what I think that the publishers think. And so I try to sort of insinuate myself into their position. I try to think about what they've heard before, how they will respond to the pitch. When I go through the benefits and value propositions that this company has been talking about, I ask myself, will this resonate with these companies? I mean, for example, if you're talking about another, header bidding solution or another wrapper, pretty well these companies are going to gloss over and, they're not going to pay any attention. If that's what you're bringing to them, you might as well not bring it. The challenge on the other side is that when you do have something new and novel and you're breaking new ground and all you have ahead of you is green field, these companies, particularly in this day and age, these giant publishers have two big problems on their side. The first of which is they are incredibly risk averse. They don't want to be the one that brought in this piece of tech and say to themselves, look, if it works, you're a hero. If it fails, you're fired. Right.
Yeah.
And I think totally. The second thing is that you have so many stakeholders in ComScore 50. You have so many departmental stakeholders. You have so many stakeholders within each department that trying to get consensus and trying to get a product move forward has at this point reached the challenge that I'm not sure anybody who isn't already sort of insinuated into the process, anybody trying to crack into new things this day really has a big challenge ahead of them.
From what you've seen with the publisher market in particular, like it's we like to say it's under attack. There's a lot of challenges. The open web seems to consistently see this decline of traffic, even prior to LLMs. Like we're starting to see the walled gardens really capturing the users and keeping them there. The source of news is no longer necessarily going to CNN.com. Yes, they go there, but they'll see the post on a Facebook or an Instagram screenshot or an image or a quick summary. What becomes more important for publishers now with the industry changing so much and the traffic steadily on a decline?
So, well, I mean, you sort of answered your question with your own answer. I mean, it's that traffic. It's obviously also the trust and the credibility. And that relies more on obviously the consumer than it does the publishing outlet itself. I mean, I'm sure that these publishers are all producing very credible news, fact-based, researched, and sourced appropriately for the most part. Obviously, there have been some scandals on the editorial side of some of the big pubs. But I think, the big problem that they have, and one of the things that I think has changed and for the better, it's one of the things that I feel is a very promising change, is that people are now starting to really question where they're getting their news from. You talked about, Facebook and other social media driving people to the site. I mean, you have to sort of hope that happens. It's not the best thing for the publisher, obviously, that their traffic isn't coming directly to them, but it's coming from social media outlets. But better that than nothing, because at least when they arrive at the particular outlet's real website, they are getting credible news from credible sources. There's a documentary I watched the other day on PBS about Alden Capital. I'm going to not speak too ill of Alden Capital because a really good friend of mine works there. But they have this documentary that I recommend to anybody working, particularly on the sell side. It's called Stripped for Parts. It's the story of Alden Capital, and talks about how all of the local news in our country is going away literally at like 2 or 3 or 5 publications a week. And it's a really interesting documentary because these journalists, not just for the sake of their own jobs, not just for the sake of their own greed and their own futures and their own paychecks, but for the love of the industry and and because of the importance of local news and what happens when local news goes away, have really activated and taken up this crusade to make sure that local media sticks around, that it continues to remain financed. I won't talk about NPR and public television and the funding around those things, because those are just two hot potato subjects that I don't care to get into for what I'm sure are obvious reasons. But I did really like the fact that some promising news came out of this documentary, this PBS documentary. That the pulse seems to be changing, that the publishers seem to really recognize the importance of their job and how they need to, maintain the credibility, and how the public has begun to react.
Where do you think things are heading overall when it comes to the ad tech space? AI's utilization is becoming more and more common. I'm not sure if you were at Marketecture Live that we just had a couple of weeks ago, but Terry Kawaja has a way of speaking and a way of talking about the industry. He's very much so a very bullish on the industry person. I understand why. I totally get it. But for the first time, really publicly, he kind of came out and said, there's a lot of companies that are pretending to have AI, and then I look at their solution and it's nothing. How do you think AI is going to benefit publishers? How do you think it's going to play a role in the growth of the space, even though we're seeing a little bit of headwinds, if you can say that, towards the industry just because of all the change?
I think you can, and I think it's exactly right. I mean, I do think, ad tech in general has this, attitude towards the bright and shiny. It's always been that way. For as long as I've been around, and again, I've been around as long as any in this industry. We have talked about these bright and shiny objects that people seize on, and so suddenly everybody is, got a .ai domain. They're built on machine learning and all these things, and I think they do a huge disservice. I think the reality of it is that there are useful advantages of AI for the most part. I'm not that pro, or to steal your term, bullish on AI. I do think that AI moving forward will have some, how shall I say this diplomatically, some use and value, but I think at the moment it does more harm than good. I don't think that people really fully yet understand all of what it, for example, I'm going to just, transition off the industry for a moment. If I were working in biotech or pharma research and somebody told me that you could synthesize a protein in a day that used to take 10 years and that will lead to a breakthrough cancer drug, I'd be like, AI is the greatest thing I've ever heard, right? I mean, easily you say, there are solutions for which AI is absolutely, they are going to cure cancer. There's no question that with the use of a powerful technology like that, can you say the same thing about publishing or the ad tech industry in general? No, I don't think so. I don't think the I don't think the AI is there. I don't think that the AI people haven't really figured out what the applications for these things are. I mean, going back to Spiny for a moment, Spiny had AI recommendations baked in. It was useful, don't get me wrong, but it was not the core feature. The core feature still remained the content analytics platform. Could it learn, could it machine learn and make recommendations on which content you should create more of? Yeah, I can, but that's a pretty rudimentary task. And so, I'm not sure I get quite what all the AI hype is. I do think that if you ask me this question 2 or 3 or 5 years from now, I'll give you a very different answer. But at the moment, I think it's a lot of smoke, very little fire, a lot of hype, and not a whole lot behind it.
One of my colleagues posted about this just the other day about the overemphasis of AI across all of the marketing material, across the messaging in market, and that people are getting a little bit of AI fatigue. And it's a little bit crazy, the amount of AI usage already. And even just us talking about it today, but it's just such a hot topic. But there's so much push towards AI is going to revolutionize the industry and it's going to do this, but we're not even there yet. A lot of it is hypothetical. We talk about operationalizing things and increasing efficiency with AI. I'm not necessarily sure I've seen anything that's really done this at scale. Sure, it's on a few beta partners. Sure, it's rolled out to 1 or 2 partners overall, but not at scale. even with the Gen AI solutions in market, there's been some acquisitions in the market. There's talks of more. I hear a lot of what happens. The creative that's being spun up is not of agency quality, right? It's not done with a team of experts. So yes, it's here. Is it replacing? Not necessarily, in my opinion.
Yeah, but the reality of it is that right, like people are assessing things. I assess things like this. I mean, going back to what I said at the very beginning, right? New company from some foreign country comes along and starts telling me its pitch, starts talking to me, and I start asking them questions about their benefits and value propositions. And one of the things that immediately comes up is AI. And you say, like, look, as a marketer, my job is to talk about things that the audience I'm targeting wants to hear, and that's what they want to hear. So don't blame me. The reality of it is that everybody has, to your point, jumped onto this buzzword. They want to be part of this AI revolution, and so if you come in there and start talking about AI, you're just telling these people what it is that they want to hear. And and there is a fair argument behind that. I don't support it, and I don't do it myself. And I think that if you have really good AI, then you should talk about it. But if you're talking about it just merely as putting a hook in someone's mouth, and you don't really, back it up, but you're just sort of using the current nomenclature or the current trend just so that you can attract more attention. Again, going back to the way things were back in the day. Back in the day, you could sell what we used to refer to as the three-wheeled car. You'd say to somebody like, the tech isn't quite ready yet. We have a three-wheel car. Drive it like this, and we'll give you the fourth wheel, and we'll straighten you out. But for now, you'll be fine. You could just go down the road on three. No, you can't do that stuff anymore. The buyers, especially on the sell side, the publishers, they're way too sophisticated. They've been burned way too many times by, I'm not saying bad ad tech vendors or bad actors who have tried to sell products. But, we work in an industry that works at a breakneck pace. You're under a lot of pressure to get your product into market as quickly as you can, to try to get an exit as quickly as you can. And so there are defensible points of view for companies like this that say to themselves, what do you want me to do? My investors are demanding that I roll this thing out. My investors are demanding that I have AI and machine learning. I do actually have this type of thing. And so are they window dressing a little bit? Sure. Are they putting lipstick on a pig? I don't know that I would go quite that far. I get it as a guy who is a, former marketer myself. It's tempting to talk about, and it is real. I just think that people tend to exaggerate. The hyperbole is really what the problem is, not the AI.
So what are you excited about, Michael? Like, where do you see things going? Where do you see an opportunity as someone who's been in the industry for quite some time? What are you bullish on?
I mean, I remain bullish. I am a dedicated, fully bought into the sell side. I absolutely believe in the publishers. I'm glad to see, it's really encouraging to see that all of these publishers are sort of starting to really stabilize, that the audiences, people talk about these audiences going away. You and I talked about it, leaving for social media. I see all those trends starting to change. I think social media, I have children. My children who were social media addicts a year or two ago are, less and less on a daily basis using social media. I have been very anti-social media, sort of since the beginning. I don't know if you saw Professor Galloway was on the Today Show this morning talking about the harm that social media has done to men, particularly young men in the United States. I think there's a number of us that are out there, guys my age, that are, have not been fans and will not be fans of social media. And so I'm glad to see that social media is starting to give back the audiences to the publishers. I think the publishers are, really starting to say, as I said, stabilize and do better. So I'm sure you saw the news last week about the Daily Beast and how successful they've become and the turnaround that they've undergone. I do think the Daily Beast is a model for what a lot of publishers are going to start seeing in the next couple of quarters and years. And so I'm incredibly optimistic about the sell side of the equation. And to me, the sell side of the equation is the very core, because without it, there is no buy side, right? There's nothing to buy on.
Thank you for saying that, because most people don't.
And so, if we don't work together to make sure that publishers stick around, it harms the buy side worse. They don't have anywhere to transact their buys and put their creative. And so, Like I said, I'm a tried and true, dug in sell side guy. I always will be. I got a couple of years left in this industry, unless the industry will be kind enough to keep me for a few more, because I'll stay as long as it will have me, because I love it that much. And I do think that finally, it took a long time. There was a lot of zigs and a lot of bad zags, but I do think things are finally starting to turn around, and that we're starting to see really important improvement.
When you look at the gaps in the market today, and as you build and think about the future, where do you see yourself fitting in, and what type of concepts do you have in mind, if you want to talk about them, or ideas do you have in mind that you think would be beneficial to the space?
I hate to keep answering your questions, ATG, with a question, or filling them in, but it's, to me, the only answer to that question is, look, I'm not a guy who complains about isms, but the industry is not particularly friendly to people my age. So my hope is that people will start to understand the value that guys my age bring. We do have a lot of experience, right? The joke I make in all this is I say the exact same thing. You say, you walk into a doctor's office, God forbid, you need a very serious operation on your brain. I'm going to offer you two doctors. One doctor has done the operation once. One doctor has done it 10,000 times. Which one of the two doctors do you pick, right, to do this delicate surgery on your brain? And people always say, well, obviously I take the guy for 10,000. I say, right. Now just think about that in the context of ad tech. We've been around a long time. We've seen a lot of things. We've been through a lot of battles and a lot of wars. We've come out of these things a little bit scarred, but still, in one piece. And so, I think that I'd like to stay in the industry as long as the industry will have me. But if I'm being honest, it's becoming increasingly difficult to find work, and some of that has to do with a personality like mine, which I openly admit rubs some people the wrong way. But a lot of it also has to do with the fact that just, you sort of take a look at my, my CV. I get recommendations of people like, you got to take this off. Your thing is too long. Nobody cares about anything longer than 10 years. And you say, really? Like, is that the way these things go these days? You got to cut your LinkedIn profile down because nobody wants to see that you're experienced. You start talking about experience. Experience is a bad word. What kind of industry or what kind of environment am I living in when experience turns out to be a disadvantage? And so I realized that didn't exactly answer your question, but that's kind of the best answer I can give. I just continue to sort of stay on the same track of what I'm doing. Other than this one project that I mentioned to you earlier, which I'm happy to talk about if you think that the environment is suitable for it.
Sure. Yeah, I would say, like, if you want to give I'm always happy to hear about the ideas in market. Go for it.
So I've been working on this idea now for a couple of years that I sort of loosely refer to as ad aid. Ad aid, comes in the style of, again, for people my age, Farm Aid and Live Aid and these big concerts of many decades ago that were really sort of charitable concerts that, big musicians put on for, good causes. And so, what I've always thought about it, that in the context of ad tech is, we talk about all the time about how advertising, there's the old joke about advertising. Say, I know half my advertising doesn't work. I just don't know which half. And so you say, it's really both halves. Neither half works. People don't want to see ads. They're overwhelmed in ads. They see them, they view them as intrusive. And for a long time, the way the industry has met the increasing intrusivity, if that's a word, I probably just made it up, or the increasing intrusiveness of ads is to say, so you don't want to look at my ad, you don't like the ad. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to have a screen takeover. I'm going to make it more intrusive. You're going to try to figure out a way to circumvent me. You're going to turn on ad blockers. You're going to configure these settings in your, in your browser. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, originally the covenant was, hey, listen, we're providing you this content. The least you could do is watch our ad. That was always a fair exchange. You say, I'm consuming all of this content for free. I like free content. It's good for everybody because I can consume unlimited content because I don't have to worry about paywalls. And then suddenly, obviously, all of these things changed and people had to start pay for content and they didn't like that. And the advertisers had to get more aggressive because people were just ignoring their ad. And so what I've been talking about with ad aid for a long time has been, You say, instead of making this experience worse for the end user, why don't you try to do something to make it better for them? You steal their data and you sell and you profit on it. They don't like that. You cut off the enjoyment of their YouTube video by sticking some mid-roll in the middle of things that, which is an obnoxious, unwelcome intrusion, also not good. Why don't you try to figure out something that would make the experience better for the end user? But the only way I could figure out how to do that was to give them something, let them gain something from that experience. So the idea behind Ad Aid is you say, you can have Ad Aid sponsored ads, and these are ads that will work in IAB, in standard IAB units. You don't need to change your creative. You don't need to change anything. You just need to layer a button over it that says, this is an Ad Aid ad. And the hope would be that people will start clicking on it because they will derive a benefit from that experience. To date, there has been no advantage to a user clicking on an ad. You say, well, you'll learn about a product or you'll learn about a service. No, you don't. No, you don't. Nobody clicks on ads. Click-through rates remain fractions of 1%. It's been that way for eons, and it's not going to change. How do you get people to interact with your ad, to care about? Give them something to care about. And so if they can participate in the process and derive a benefit from it, then maybe somebody will actually click on an ad and care about the content of that ad. And so that's all Ad Aid wants to do, is try to figure out a way to say, we could take you through to a landing page. We can make donations to, charities or other causes. We can do something good. You have companies like Bombas that give away a free pair of socks, or Patagonia, or, Dawn dishwashing liquid. All of these companies out there that have these environmentally friendly products or that care about things, the generations of people that are coming up in this day and age care. They genuinely care. And so, this will play right into their hands and say, like, I'm taking an active role. I'm doing something to the benefit of my community or to my population or to my country or to my preferred charity or something. So, okay, it's an ad. I still don't love it, but at least I'm deriving something beneficial from the ad experience.
That sounds really interesting. I'd actually be curious to see if there was a incentive. We'll call it an incentive, but a incentive for users to click because it goes towards a charitable contribution or environmental or some sort of fairness, if that would actually increase the click-through rate. I would guess that if I was on a website and I saw something like, whatever, engage with this ad, and you'd be helping donate to some sort of service, even if it's $1 or a penny or a quarter of that ad impression, or even if it's a direct donation, the chances are I would be highly likely to donate or be involved, especially if it's a cause I care about. I'd love to see it happen.
And if you could determine that cause yourself, right? If you have control over that, it gives you even more control over the experience, right? And I think there's one last thing that I would say. You think about the number of celebrities and athletes, right? Like everywhere you go, you see LeBron James, you see Shaquille O'Neal, you see Kevin Hart, you see the two brothers. Who am I thinking of? Well, the Manning brothers, right? And you say these guys are compensated to the tunes of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars by all of these giant brands. Let these brands take 10% of that spend. So, if you're Shaquille O'Neal and you have 10 or 12 major brands that are paying you tens of millions of dollars, we're just talking about shaving a fraction. Like, you're still making $100 million this year in ads. And so, like, you're doing just fine. You're a billionaire. You have enough money. We're going to just cut a little bit off this, and we're going to reallocate that money to something a little bit more important than you going out and buying, no disrespect by this, another Lamborghini. And so, I think that these athletes who are genuinely good people, many of them have foundations, those foundations help people, they would be very pleased to give away a portion. They're giving away a portion of that money already. This is just giving them one more channel to put that money towards. And so you say, if you think about the hundreds of billions of dollars that are circulating around in advertisement just to celebrities and athletes, if we could just get a tiny fraction of that money, allocated into different places, things would go, well, we presumably could fix or help a lot of things. And so that's the idea. Now the question is, who in the audience is going to call me tomorrow and tell me that they want to help make this thing happen?
Maybe. You never know. Maybe someone's listening and they'll drop you a quick email or LinkedIn message and it becomes a reality very quickly.
We can hope. We can always hope.
Michael, I really appreciate you being on here. I am really glad that the introduction was made. So thanks again for being my guest, and looking forward to talking to you soon.
The pleasure was mine. I'll try to think up some things for the Redux, which hopefully will come 1 year to date.
We'll do it. We'll make it happen.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. ATJ was great. Thank you so much.